May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be to the greater honor and glory of God. Amen. I want to start out with a little contrast between the story of the sacrifice of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac and Hannah's story that we heard in the beginning. That we all kind of probably, hopefully know the story of how God had promised Abraham a son, and then along comes Isaac, and then God says, I want you to take him to this designated mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him to me. And in obedience, Abraham loads up the donkey with the wood and takes Isaac and takes him up on the mountain, and just before he goes to sacrifice him, God stops him and saves him. What we never hear in this story is, where was Sarah? Did Sarah know what was going on? But Sarah did, we think, find out, because after the sacrifice, Abraham goes off to live in a different place from Sarah, and we don't hear about Sarah again until she dies and Abraham buys a plot to have her buried. So we kind of get the feeling that she wasn't real happy when she found out about what Abraham had tried to do. But one of the things that, if we were Sarah, we would think that no mother would sacrifice her child in such a way. There was a book and a movie that came out a number of years ago called Sophie's Choice. And while it was not based on a true story, it was loosely based on things that did happen in the Holocaust. That Sophie was a non-Jew who had been arrested and with her 2 children and had been taken to Auschwitz. And when she got to the Auschwitz concentration camp, she was immediately ordered to choose which one of her children would be immediately killed and which one would be saved. She had a boy and a daughter. And so she chose the daughter, I think it was, to be sacrificed. So there's actually this thing called, in psychological terms, called Sophie's Choice, which means any time that you have a choice between 2 difficult moral decisions, that you have to make one of those decisions. In Hannah's story, it's a little different from the story of Abraham sacrificing Isaac and Sarah's reaction or non-reaction. That in this story, that Hannah, who is childless, prays to God fervently, so much so that the priest Eli thinks she's drunk, and she says, "No, I just really, really, want this child." And so God blesses her, and she has Samuel, and then she weans him, and then she, in a sense, sacrifices him or gives him over to the temple. It wasn't a complete sacrifice, because she would go to visit him once a year to take him new clothes and to check up on him and so on. But these are not the only sacrifices that we have in the Bible, or near sacrifices. That God himself has made sacrifices. There are a number of places in the Bible where God is considered in the feminine. That God is considered the mother of Israel, the mother of his chosen people. So in this gospel story of the temple, I see God making 2 different sacrifices. One is that God had given the Israelites the instructions for how to build that tabernacle, how to build that place of worship that they used and wandered around 40 years in the wilderness. And then God gave the instructions to David, who then gave them to Samuel, on how to build this temple, which was modeled on the tabernacle. So God makes this decision that that the temple is going to be sacrificed. feel like God could have possibly saved the temple if the people had listened to God and had repented. But in sacrificing the temple, God also sacrifices his Son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. But in sacrificing Jesus Christ on the cross, God is creating a new temple. That we hear in the story on Good Friday and Holy Week of how when Jesus died on the cross, that the temple, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go, in even fear of death, that curtain was torn in two, meaning that all people would now have access to God. So we hear in Hebrews of how now, because of Jesus' death on the cross, that we get to go through this curtain of Jesus' flesh, and that we have access to God. Jesus is the new temple. Jesus had said to the officials, and that when they were admiring the temple and so on, that tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Of course, he was talking about his death and his resurrection and his glory, in which people could then come to him. As I think about temples, and it makes me think about churches and the destruction of the temple, of churches that have either formed. The one that comes to mind that's still going strong is a church in Brownsburg, Good Samaritans. They still don't have a building. They worship in various places, and they're growing. They're going strong, and so and they're almost in a sense of fear of having building a church of brick and mortar, because it would change the dynamics of who they are. I think of a church that St. John's Speedway, they had a building for a long time, but yet structural repairs to the church were such that they could not make those repairs. And so they made the hard decision to abandon their church building. But yet they too are still going strong in the midst of this. They are still getting together and doing good ministry in the community around them. Then I think of churches, even in our own neighborhood, of St. Luke's Camilton, where they needed so many repairs to their building. It's a very historic building over there. But their congregation had gotten rather small, down to about a dozen people. And the diocese said, we can't support this anymore. And so they put their building up for sale. And a couple bought it, and for its historic value, and they're in the process of working on it. But yet the funny thing is they kept continuing to worship, and they were given permission to worship in that building. And the couple that bought the building liked worshiping with them, and they became Episcopalians. And so they, the diocese don't own it, these people do, but they're still worshiping regularly in this building. And I think of when I first came, St. James and Vincennes, that when Carl Bruce was there, but then he retired and left, and they went a number of years without a priest. And of course, me being quickly becoming a representative of the churches in our southwest area, I would hear them pleading with me and to intercede on behalf of the diocese, to save our building, save our communion, to get us a priest, not realizing that, they could continue to do ministry, even without all of these things. They do have now a priest, and they do have their communion and so on. As I think about all of these things, and in our gospel reading and our readings, what is the life application for us? And I come up with 3 things. That sometimes the blessings and the things that God gives us, we're asked to give back to God in some way. there's kind of an old saying that if you hang on to things that you love so dearly, so tightly, that it's harder it's more painful when you have to open your hand and let those things go. All through our life, we're called to say goodbye to things that we love and people we love. And the harder we hold on to things, the harder it is to let go of those things. But if we thank God for them and we hold on to them loosely, then maybe it's not quite so painful. It is painful. It's always painful to let go and say goodbye to things. But sometimes new things come. It's that, again, that old saying, and I found it to be true in my own life, that when God closes a door, a window opens, that, I wouldn't be a priest today if God hadn't closed the door on my career as a graphic designer and opened the way for me to become a priest. Second, in order for God to do a new thing, and that old things have to pass away. That we hear in the Bible, all things that are old are passed away. See, I am doing a new thing. And I think that this kind of leads to the third thing, that ask yourself, during this time of COVID, in this pandemic, what are the things that you have had to sacrifice? What are the things that you have had to let go of and may never get back again? We as a church, we're in the bishop's homily yesterday at the Eucharist at convention. She said, our church, all churches are radically changed. They'll never be the same again. Hopefully, we continue to spread the gospel, through the internet and through live streaming, moving on, spreading that gospel to people who may never have heard it before, the good news of Jesus Christ. That the temple was destroyed, but yet a new thing was done. So what new things is God doing in your life? What things have you had to say goodbye to make way for new things that God is putting before you? Amen.